Welcome everyone to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Foundation Episode 1. It is called The Emperor's Peace. And I'll start spoiler free because it is an Episode 1. It is a new show from Apple Plus, and it is a big science fiction space opera style show with a lot of budget behind it. I think that was very clear from the trailers that Apple pumped a lot of money into this. And it's very big, it's very rich in its effects and its production value and all those other things. We have multiple planets, we have vistas that are filled with cyberpunk looking cities. Well, kind of cyberpunk, not kinda. We got more sort of barren kind of outer rim world planets that you might see in certain science fiction. You get all that stuff going on. We have a story that spans decades. We have multiple eras. I think the story as it goes on even spans greater amounts of time based on the premise, but the premise is kind of weird. It's always weird to talk about an episode 1 and do the spoiler free part because there's a certain amount of just what the show is going forward, which is just kind of the premise. But the first episode takes the whole episode to kind of like set up that premise. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It's given it the sort of the weight that it should have get into it. But it makes it kind of weird. Like, what do I admit here as I tell you the premise? But the plot of this first episode revolves around a young woman, maybe a teenager. I don't know if it was made clear. Named Gail. It's spelled Gaal, but for the most part, it sounded like they were saying Gail when they were saying it. So she's coming from an outer planet called Synax. Bear with me, there's a lot of new place names, people names, lots of things going on here. And going to this sort of central world of Trantor, I believe it was called. And this is where the Empire is. And she's here because she won a math competition, and there's some controversy with that, but she won that, and she's going to meet Jared Harris's character, Harry Seldon, who is a psycho... Oh, what was the word? See, there's too many new words. Psychomathematics? It wasn't psychomathematics, it was psychostatistics, something like that. Anyway, she's going there to sort of be his like apprentice, effectively. But what his work is that he uses math to make bold predictions of large groups of people. Like, we're talking civilizations, and in this case, in this world that is set up, we're talking thousands and thousands of planets full of human beings. And the idea that you can't necessarily predict what an individual will do, but you can predict kind of within a certain frame of time when there will be uprisings, or when when a civilization will turn and it'll fall and things like that. And that's the big thing that is set up in this episode, is that he's predicting that this empire that currently exists, which has been going for thousands, I think 12,000 of years, they said, will be gone within 500. And this is core premise. This is not spoiler. This is very much the premise of the show. And for possibly 30,000 years, there will be a dark age of nothing but war between different worlds, and it'll be a horrible, horrible time. So, and there's a lot of controversy because the Empire don't like hearing this because they feel it's challenging their rule. They're arrogant and everything else you might assume. But and there's more interesting stuff to talk about with them, and there's kind of obviously what it sets up going forward with these characters and what the actual core premise of the show is in terms of how it's going to function. There's a lot going on here, and there's a lot to kind of digest, especially in episode 1. And I guess the first thing I will say is that it is very high production value, like I said. But I will also say that despite a few concerns I had, I mostly quite enjoyed this first episode. The pacing's pretty strong in that I never felt that I was being bogged down. There was a little worry early on that they were throwing a lot of name places at me. I was getting a lot of captions saying we're going here and here. But the funny thing is that all of the places and characters that it introduces in the first, 10, 20 minutes, because the episode's just over an hour long, it's like an hour and 5 minutes or something like that. by the end of the episode, everything felt relevant to what the core point of the episode was. By the time it got to the end and made its point of this is the story it's set up, these are the core characters involved, and this is what we're doing. Looking back, nothing they introduced was like, oh, that could have been left for episode 2, or that should have been held back for later, which is a problem that I often have with pilots, especially for big high concept shows like this, where you've got entire new worlds to explore with different groups of people. You need to sort of do it, slowly and whatever. And there was definitely times early in this episode where I thought this might get overwhelming, this might be exactly what I don't like about fantasy, and there are definitely some fantasy-esque things in this, even though it's spaceships and even though it's multiple worlds and science fiction. The fact that we have a very sort of royal empire kind of setup makes me think of fantasy more than it does science fiction. I'm not saying that there's no other sci-fi with that in it, of course there is, but it just, it's kind of veering towards the things that I am not as much of a fan of. And scenes where they're holding sort of like a court style thing, like I tend to zone out of that sort of stuff, and there was multiple points where I thought I might be about to kind of like not like this. To his credit, it never kind of went over a line where it mattered too much, because it did a good job of staying focused in what it was setting up and kind of escalating the core idea that it set up early in the episode and to the point where kind of big stuff happens. I'm not going to say it's perfect necessarily, because there's definitely a few things that you just kind of have to accept their word for, that this is as big as they say it is, or something, some of those things. But visuals are obviously very strong by and large. It looks like you're watching a big budget movie most of the time. Only once or twice did it feel like the effects maybe faltered slightly. There's like a statue of the emperor. I think it looks a bit fake at times. I don't know. It's maybe just the material. I think it's like maybe made out of gold, and it just looks a bit iffy. There's definitely a couple of things with the Empire, who are actually clones of each other. They are, so it's not like for the past like 400 or 500 years, I think they said, they've just been cloning the same emperor over and over. So there's 3 versions of him right now, and they refer to them as Dawn, Day, and Dusk. Day's the main one, who's kind of currently in power because he's the one who's like middle-aged. Dusk is like an old man, and Dawn is this a kid who's still learning his ways. And he's kind of being his own father and grandfather. It's a whole weird thing. So they set that up in the episode, and they, or you know what I mean, Empire, because they don't refer to them as the Empire. They refer to him as Empire. It's kind of weird, but you kind of get the gist of it as it's going. So they set up that, and you have that side of things, and I do think that's maybe where I was finding some of the, I'm a pompous emperor who's going to kill people with a wave of my hand kind of attitude. Like, some of that's a bit too theatrical, it's just like it's trying to do his best Joaquin Phoenix from Gladiator kind of thing, but but Joaquin Phoenix, what made that performance in Gladiator so good is that he just has this unhinged look behind his eyes the entire time, where he might try and like have sex with his sister and then kill everyone in the room and drink their blood, like that. He has that unhinged look behind his eyes the whole time. Whereas Lee Pace, who is playing Emperor Day, or Brother Day, I think he's credited as in the IMDb, he just comes off as a bit cheesier at times. So I probably enjoyed their scenes the least. But that being said, it wasn't like what they were contributing in terms of giving you the other side of this conflict wasn't actually adding to the story. So it never felt like that much of a... Like, I wasn't like groaning when we cut to those scenes. I wasn't like getting to the point where I was like, oh, we're doing this now. Everything felt like it had a purpose, but especially once it started to all come together. And by the time, because right away you introduced to a few characters, there's some narration. It starts in the future and it kind of cuts back to our main story, and we're introduced to Jared Harris's character. We're introduced to Gale, a few side characters. We're introduced to the Empire. And then, as it goes on, all the characters do converge, and they all kind of become part of one story, and they all feel relevant. And I didn't feel like too overwhelmed by the end. Like, it'd be easy to feel it at the start because you're sort of getting, different details of different things. They're hinting at what, you know, the people who live on Gale's homeworld are like. Synax, they are very religious and they're very anti-science and math, which is why it's kind of notable that she came out of there being this math, you know, prodigy. So that's kind of set up right from the get-go. So that's neat. It sets up kind of the core ideas of the show are very, I think, relatable. And I mean, probably always have been, but at least for me, having this mathematician say, "I'm predicting the fall of this empire," and it's definitely going to happen. But what we can do is we can limit how long the bad period is going to be, and we can soften everything. We can make it more, you know, everything sounds like we're talking about climate change, right? He's not literally talking about climate change. He's talking about, you know, rise and fall of civilizations. He's talking about conflict. But climate change is referenced in the episode later on, actually, from Gale about her planet. But, you know, everything sounds like a modern day debate about climate change and how, okay, things are happening. We're past the point where some stuff is definitely going to happen. But if you actually listen to the warnings, we can maybe do something about it. There's a lot of that baked into this, and it's what science fiction. It's what's so good about using science fiction is you can almost hit the nail on the head when it comes to certain topics and certain debates without actually directly talking about the debate. Anyone with half a brain cell will hear the debate and like the trial we get in this episode where they're demanding him to explain what his predictions are and what needs to happen. It's impossible not to think about those real world debates without them actually having the same arguments. There was a problem I had in the Why the Last Man show, the first few episodes, where the political debate was just the real political debate of Democrats versus Republicans and what to do in the crisis. But it very much just became far like a cartoony version of real people bickering over the same things. This felt like it was having something to say about a real world debate, but putting it in a different wrapper. And I know that sounds like, well, listen, does it matter? Should it not just work if you do the same thing? Well, in theory it could, but here's the thing. Fiction, the wonderful thing about fiction is that it's also an escape. I know that sounds like a contradictory thing, but there is this wonderful balance that is reached where you have fiction that is saying something and feels important and resonant to a real idea, and therefore it feels like it has something to say and it doesn't just feel like fluff. But at the same time, if you want it to be an escape, you want it to be something where you can explore those ideas but in a way that is entertaining and riveting and, you know, all the things that come with good entertainment. So you want that marriage to kind of work. If it becomes too just like the real debate, then it becomes not an escape and it becomes just kind of we're retreading everything we're trying to avoid. And if it becomes too nonsensical, then it's just fluff and nothing means anything, and you can't get into the conflict or what the characters are fighting for or anything like that. So I should say this is based on a set of books. I've never read the books. The first time I heard of, you know, Foundation and all this stuff was when they announced this show was being developed, and here we are. We're, you know, 10 episode season. So it's worth mentioning as well that episode 2 did go out the same time as episode 1. I like this enough that I will be checking out episode 2, and that'll probably be Sunday. Could be Monday, but probably Sunday. Maybe late Sunday, but I'm thinking Sunday. And yeah, we're going to have a look at it and see kind of how I feel now that the plot's kind of moving forward. But I kind of like the two lead characters, that being Gale and Harry. And I mean, Jared Harris is a very likable actor usually, so it's not hard to kind of go along. And I think having an established actor that we recognize works in that role, because he's meant to be this guy that our new character or our newcomer, and you know, she's probably been in other stuff, but she's not like a big name like Jared Harris is Lou LaBelle, if I'm saying her name right. But being a newcomer effectively to most people's eyes, she fits that role of this younger person who's looking up to this you know, in the real world, it's this younger actor looking up to this experienced veteran who's been in numerous movies and shows, good and bad, for decades. But in the context of the show, it's this scientist and mathematician who has been scrutinized and is all these things, and there's kind of a hopeful aspiration for what the characters are going to be doing, which is really nice. You don't want it just to be this miserable thing. And again, that was something that felt like I was a little bit worried that this was just going to be like a miserable show. And you need sort of those slithers of hope. You need those characters that you actually want to root for. And there was definitely a period in the middle where, well, I'm definitely not rooting for the Empire. They feel too villainous. But Harry felt a little bit standoffish. But by the end of the episode, though, it does kind of feel like, okay, we have kind of who we consider to be our heroes. And not that they have to always fit into a particular box, but you want to be able to root for something. It's just one of those things that bothers me in certain shows that I just can't get behind anyone. There's a real art to me for having a show where there is no clear-cut good person, or at least someone who has enough sense of good that you can kind of get behind them as a honorable character. And it's very impressive to me when something is made that doesn't have that, and I still get engaged with it, because I just think it's very difficult, and it has happened. Like there are examples of it, but certainly I don't find myself getting into some things that other people really love. I think Boardwalk Empire is maybe a good example here. I watched a few episodes. I didn't get anything out of it. Mad Men's another one. I just didn't like that. I watched the whole season of that. I'd say Game of Thrones as well, but Game of Thrones I think does have some more heroic characters. I think the problem with Game of Thrones was more just the hardcore fantasy thing for me. But yeah, so yeah, I guess I'll say spoilers. I'll say spoilers so I can talk more about the premise, and some of the other things to set up for the characters that I've maybe glossed over at this point. So basically, there's it's like an elevator. There's like an elevator going up to like a space station, which is where anyone docks when they arrive here. They go down in the elevator, and we see Gale go through this process, and it's very wonderful. And they don't actually live on the surface. Most people, it's kind of Final Fantasy VII actually, where the rich people, if not just the Empire and the Empire's employees, live above on the surface, and everyone else is on levels of subterranean cities, and that's kind of what we mostly see in the episode. So we get all this set up. We get the idea that Gale came from this religious place where they hated her. They looked at her because they hate science. They hate. She mentions later on that she tried to warn them that the tides were rising. So that's just kind of your more direct reference to climate change, but she couldn't convince them of that. And I think it is, as much as sometimes I'd complain that would be a case of maybe hitting being a bit too overt and spelling out the metaphor or spelling out the analogy. I think what kind of works about her saying that about her world is that a lot of the characters in the show are all coming from different places, and she is so separate from every other character, and she's kind of our character. She's narrating to us, she's learning things for the first time. Not everything, she obviously knows a lot about this world that we don't, but she is our conduit as a character. So I think there's actually kind of a smart little thing of her saying that she's tried to deal with climate change herself, because that is the thing that we will relate to and we will understand from this discussion, at least the way it's presented in this first episode. Obviously there's other things to get into here, with civilizations and history and all those sort of things, but because her saying that, it kind of works because she kind of is our character. She's kind of representing us in a lot of ways. Not that her planet represents us, maybe in a small way because it's so extreme, but yeah, and she has her prayer stones removed. And I actually noticed this, that she had little scars on her face, and that's because most people from her world have these stones in their face, presumably that given them as a child or birth or whatever. But yeah, so we get that sense that she felt alone. If I could compare it to something else from recently, maybe the character on Star Trek Discovery, whose name I am blanking on. The Doug Jones alien dude from Star Trek Discovery. That was very much his stories, his world. didn't really believe in science and technology, and didn't believe that there was others out there, and he kind of separated from that. So that was very much his thing. So you have her set up. She's very skeptical. She kind of like is shocked when she arrives here that Jared Harris says, "Hey, they're going to arrest us tomorrow because we're effectively trying to prove something that's, questioning the Empire, and they don't like that." But then it becomes like, well, no, did he lure her here because she's the only one who could possibly disprove or prove what he said? Because most people can't understand what he's done. They don't understand the math. But she can. She's the only one who can. And they have this sort of trial, and this is where he makes his big speeches, and he kind of spells out what the premise of the show is, that we're going to have this 30,000 years of darkness, but we can make it better. Civilization is going to fall, and we have to build basically an encyclopedia that is spread out throughout the galaxy, so that all of the history and all of the knowledge and all the story of our journey as a species is documented and is accessible in multiple places, not just one. It has to be everywhere, so that when civilization's rebuilding after the fact, they can do it, from information. They can skip ahead. They don't have to, as he puts it, they don't have to reinvent the wheel again. They can sort of get there quicker and move further up the rankings faster. So lots of interesting stuff to kind of like take in with this premise. And basically, so I mentioned the big lift, the space station lift. What did they call it? The star scraper or something like that they called it. I can't remember. There's too many new names and words in this. But some terrorists blow up, and it mostly falls onto Earth and goes down multiple levels of the world. And we hear a ridiculous, something like 100 million people have died, because it's landed like halfway across the planet and down the multiple levels, killing people. And this was kind of the first big sign that he's right. That, he was saying that this might not start for a little while yet, but it's hard to predict the specifics of this. And he's not surprised. So they take both Gale and Harry to go to the Empire, and he's like, I'm not surprised this happened. It's bound to. Like, you have to stop cloning yourselves, and you have to start taking this seriously. And it's actually Gale who jumps in and kind of bluffs a little bit by saying that if they kill them, if they kill, herself and Harry, that it will only speed up this fall. Possibly because it'll make them martyrs if you're sort of analysing it, but that's what'll happen. And she's kind of bluffing. Well, she's not completely bluffing. She's as she puts it, she's hypothesizing, and it's not actually a ridiculous theory. It sounds actually quite plausible, but it's not something she's seen proven in his maths. And I think it's kind of giving me a sense that she's making a little bit of leap, and that's something he tries to convince her of earlier in the episode, that she does have some more agency than she perhaps thinks she does. And one of the sort of the key things that comes out of this story is that as we get towards the end of the episode, it becomes very clear that Harry predicted a lot of things. Like, he predicted what the outcome of all this was going to be. He predicted what they'd do to them. But he predicted that instead of being killed, they're going to be sent to start off this, as they put it, their foundation, which is, hence the name of the show, of this record of these predictions of the history of life, whatever. And they're going to be sent off to this other planet, which is the planet that's in the bookends, which I'll get to in a second. And it's like, no, we're going to go out there. But there's a cynical side here, which is like, okay, so if you prove me wrong at any point, you'll just, kill us and let the whole project fall apart. If it turns out we're right, then you'll just take whatever we do and claim it as your own and say, the Empire saved everyone. The Empire's been smart enough to plan for this. The Empire's done this. But he knew this was going to happen, and he makes that clear to Gale. And yeah, so it ends in this kind of hopeful note where she's like, I wanted to save my world, and he's like, dream bigger. Why not the whole galaxy? Why not the entirety of human civilization? It ends in this kind of hopeful note with them walking off, and it's kind of like I was saying, the one thing that was maybe lacking in the middle a little bit was really someone to root for. And it's not that I couldn't root for Gail, but Gail herself didn't even know what she was trying to accomplish at a certain point in this episode. She was too busy trying to take in that Harry might be manipulating her, that the Empire wants to do this or that. She feels kind of lost and stuck in the middle of all these big conflicts when she's never left her a little tiny crappy world before. There's all this stuff going on, but by the end of the episode, it kind of feels that there's a mission statement set out that's very, it's a very ideological mission statement. And I'm sure there'll be trials and tribulations. They're taking a slow ship. I don't know if we're going to get that journey next episode. I'll find out, I suppose. But I have a lot of reasons to be hopeful here. Obviously, the production value makes it very hard to ignore because it does look so good most of the time. And there's just little things, like there's like androids who are on some of the ships and stations when, Gail wakes up during the jump drive when she's supposed to be in hypersleep, and no one's supposed to do that, so it's kind of setting up that she's special, which is a little bit of a trope. She's special, and not quite the chosen one, but there's a little bit of that vibe, which see how they handle it. I'm not necessarily in love with that kind of trope too much because it's been done to death, but this book series is quite old, I think, so I can't really blame it too much versus the other things that have happened and came since. And there's some other details that I'm sure I'm glossing over. There's the two worlds that are at war that the Empire deals with, who the terrorists might belong to. Some of the things they said before they blew up the stations, and there's little details in there to make you care and make it feel like it's darker. Like there's some children that are clearly there before the explosion goes off. They have bombs like embedded in their skin. They just kind of hit their wrist and boom. A detail here, I loved the fall. All the pods and the lift falling through the atmosphere was great. I especially like the woman who was inside one of the pods where there was passengers, and the glass breaks, but it breaks once they're already kind of in the atmosphere, so she doesn't instantly die. She's clearly going to die. There's no way she's surviving this. But there's a great close-up where she's still kind of conscious, and it's just all the wind hitting her face and the sound of it, and it felt like quite visceral. They did a good job making it not feel like just some sort of light sci-fi landing where it's like, that was unfortunate. They did their job to make it feel like a big deal. The only thing that felt like they were stretching it a little bit with was when the other dude who works for Harry, who Rach, I think his name was, or Rake maybe. I'll learn these things in time as we get used to the characters and places a bit more. But he mentions that 100 million people have died, and now that everything's changed. And that felt like a little bit of a, everything's changed already in episode 1. That was the only point of the episode where I kind of feel like we're rushing this a little bit so that we can set up the premise by the end of the episode. It's just a little bit of a jump, and I don't really know what you could do to fix it, honestly. It just kind of felt like, oh, things have changed already, have they? Okay, I was just getting to grips with this premise, and you've got the catalyst already to move things further ahead. So minor quibble. It's a minor thing, but it did kind of stick out to me a little bit. But yeah, and the narration from Gail talks about the future a little bit. She's obviously saying this narration in past tense. But the opening on this other planet where they're going, Terminus, I believe, is the name of the planet. If I'm getting any of these details slightly wrong, I will, obviously get better at them as more episodes. But we basically find that so it's on the poster, this weird object, this big, looks alien. I'm not convinced it necessarily is alien. It might be, or it might be, ancient human tech from before, maybe before the last fall. Maybe that's before everything was built back up into this current empire, or maybe it's just aliens. Who knows? But you've got this monolithic kind of thing floating in the sky, and we learn from some of the kids who are here, who are actually kind of for kids who we might not see again. Maybe we will see them again, but they felt okay in their writing, I thought. One of these, like, they're sort of like kind of pre-teenage, early teenage kind of kids. Like their banter just was kind of vaguely amusing. But we learn from them that there's like a built-in defense thing for this monolith that's floating in the sky, where people can only get so close to it, and they'll be hit with this kind of sick wave, and there's a lot of flags in the ground because that's as far as people have been able to get before they pass out, and they have to be dragged back. I don't know if anyone's died from it, but it sounds like maybe. They also hint that there's some sort of like wild animal that is dangerous that's near about, so they have to be quiet. So that's an important plot detail for later. But the one kid who tries to walk in does pass out. The other kids run for help, but we get a sort of mysterious lady who comes and sort of pulls him away. And it turns out that she's possibly, I think she was Salvor, if I'm remembering this right. I'm just looking at IMDb. I think that was Salvor. Again, I'll correct any of this as we learn things better. But she, apparently, people believe she's gotten closer than anyone else, and she denies it. She says it's just kind of a myth. You know, her flag doesn't exist. But at the end of the episode, when we have Gale narrating, she mentions that this Salvor is like, as we see her walk right up to this thing and put her hand on into the light that's coming from the middle of it, that what she would find would be the answer, or it would hinge on the future of the human race or something. It was kind of big, bold, book speak at the end. I wasn't super necessarily into the narration itself at the end. So, but the actual visual, the moment, the idea of this, like, okay, whatever they start here in this, and it's actually captioned at the end, the Foundation, which is this little colony that's on this planet, 35 years into the future. I am fascinated by how the story's going to unfold when we have these different time periods, and especially if we end up jumping further ahead to see, into the worst age. If we're not already in the worst ages in 35 years, then are we in the worst ages in 100 years, 200? I mean, he said within 500, but they've made it very clear that this could be sped up or slowed down depending on what they do. So, there's a lot of things to take in here. There's a lot of stuff to get to grips here with the planets, with the societal system, and with the characters. But I think what this episode does a decent job of doing is focusing it on Gale, Harry, the Empire, having their sort of central conflict and about what they're, predicting, why the Empire doesn't like that, the conflict of that, loosely setting up the thing with the why there's terrorists in these feuding planets, which are going to be quite near this terminus planet. But also, then you also have just the extra element, which is, and here's a glimpse of the future from the start and the end of the episode. There's just kind of extra hook to say there's going to be outcomes from this, and this show is going to be bouncing back and forth in timelines, and we're going to reveal things as we go. It's kind of as far as a mission statement of an episode goes, it's pretty strong. And I would describe it as consistently fairly entertaining. If not necessarily always, like, there was times where I was almost concerned it was going to start losing me, and it never quite did. It always kind of kept the plot moving forward. It always felt like it was advancing things to the next stage of the outcome. So I'll be very curious to see, once they actually get to the planet, if that's going to happen straight away, if we're going to jump ahead, because we might, or if we're going to be traveling there. But what is the plot progression going to feel like at that point? If it can kind of keep at least up to this consistency, but I start to care more about the characters and the people in the world, then we could be in for something kind of special. Admittedly, the more Empire and regal side of your space opera is the side I'm less excited about. I'm definitely more into something a bit more Mass Effect or Expanse or a grittier kind of thing. This is veering a little the other way, which is not a bad thing. Like, there's room for variety, but what I'm saying is that anything good I'm saying about this, I'm saying it despite the fact that it's maybe not completely to my taste, but it is kind of, there's a lot of things in it still that is to my taste. So I'm curious to see it go forward and see where we go next. But yes, I'm sure there's some details that I've glossed over because there was so much to take in on this first episode. And as always, these first episodes, we tend to focus a lot on what the premise is. So I'll be back for episode 2 soon, and I will dive into that and maybe get a bit deeper into some of the characters and what they're up to. So Let me know what you thought of episode 1 of Foundation in the comments below. Like and subscribe, all that stuff. You can get me on the Twitters at mail_fuzz for channel updates, or you can, of course, get me on Twitter at Wibble89. And, of course, you can support us and everything we do here over at patreon.com/mailfuzztv for as little as $1 per month and keep all the content coming. And also check out Mailfuzz Movies for the movie podcast reviews, which includes a sci-fi movie podcast called The Atomic Cinema Experiment, which is myself and Tara talk about sci-fi movies. And the next one we've got going up is They Live, if that is of interest. So thank you very much once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?